Hey, Montel Williams here. Look, I've got some incredible news to share with you. I want to tell you about my brand new book that's coming out that's called The Sailing of the Intrepid. Now, this book is more than just an historical account. It's a tribute to the brave men who served aboard the USS Intrepid and a celebration of their extraordinary legacy. Writing this book was such an incredible story, and I'm really thrilled to be able to share it with you. So don't wait to grab your little piece of history. The book is available right now to order. You can go to montelmedia.com, and you can even get a limited autograph signed copy. Now, thank you so much for your support. I can't wait for you to read this incredible story of the sailing of the Intrepid. I'll see you on the pages. Hey guys, welcome back to Let's Be Blunt with Montel. This is the podcast where we break down the stigmas around cannabis and we explore everything and anything in its wide-ranging benefits. I'm Montel Williams, your host, and today we're deep diving into the medical use of cannabis, a topic that still has so much misinformation and so much misunderstanding. I'm thrilled to have a very special guest join us today. He's one of the leading voices in medical cannabis space and the founder of the Compassionate Cannabis Clinic. Dr. Barry Gordon has dedicated his life and his career to improving patients' quality of life, and he's an incredible advocate for cannabis education and patient access. Dr. Gordon, thank you so much. Welcome to Let's Be Blunt with Montel.
Thanks, Montel. You know what? It is an absolute honor to join you. Before popping on, I reminded you of the time that, I was able to stand behind you when you were giving a speech early in the 8 years. My clinic's been open. And you look great, by the way. Now, listen, I attribute that to cannabis. I know we'll get into a little bit, but, it's been such an important part of your life. And I want to thank you for your early impact upon my career.
Well, thank you so much, sir. And, you say I was involved early. I started getting involved in cannabis back in 2000, which was really, really way before the green rush and way before everybody jumped aboard the bandwagon. But I've been fighting for safe access for patients since about 2001. The second I realized that our U.S. government had its own patent on cannabis, I realized that there was something right that I was being involved with. And the fact our government itself recognizes how efficacious cannabis is, that put me on a trajectory to make sure that anybody who needs it has access to it. And I've been working really hard to get that done. And we're still fighting the good fight 20 years later.
Well, you know what? That's why I call where we're at now the evolution of cannabis. You were the revolution of cannabis way back when. And, you can go all the way back to California with the horrible, HIV, AIDS impact that did bring cannabis back into the house of medicine, And listen, back in the year 2000, I was an emergency medicine physician. That was my first career, right? And interestingly enough, in the year 2000, we hadn't really even hit the opioid overdose epidemic yet either. People are fascinated, Montel, by a couple of things that I tell them about my career. First off, when it comes to cannabis, I never saw a cannabis-related problem in my entire 34 years in the emergency medicine biz. And that was in big cities, Northeast Ohio primarily, Mansfield, Ohio, Alliance, Ohio, my last 13 years. Never saw a cannabis-related problem, and here's why. The products have changed. As I like to say, and it is a joke, but it's not a joke, no child ever smoked a joint, right? But now they'll find gummies and edibles. But also no adult tends to use an entire pan full of brownies, okay, as their initial entry into the cannabis world. Whereas now in today's cannabis world, it can be a hemp-derived product. It can be, a medical or a legal adult use product without the appropriate instruction. And listen, if it's 2:30 in the morning and you took a cannabinoid at 10 o'clock to try to sleep, but you took too much and it's new to you, listen, it's 2:30 in the morning, your heart rate is up, you're anxious, and you know what? A lot of those patients will call 911, always to go home the next morning, thank God. So to me, it's interesting that in my career, because it was mostly inhaled and smokable cannabis, I never saw any impact at all, zero, nada. If you smoked a joint with your friends and you didn't like it, it wore off in an hour and you became a joint passer at the parties, so to speak. It just wasn't your thing, but people didn't end up in the ER in those years.
Yeah, and way back in those years, back then, there were still edibles. Recall I used to make brownies and muffins back in 2001, 2002. Um, yeah, some of them were a little strong, and I do remember some people having some rough experiences with them, but nobody running to the hospital. Nowadays, you've got to go to the hospital because you don't know what people are putting in it. I mean, hearing that in certain cities around the country, they're finding some of the street cannabis has anywhere from 2 to 3% of fentanyl sprinkled on it. And I mean,
It's scary. It's scary. That leads into the second thing I was going to say that changed in my emergency medicine career of 34 years. In the first half of that career, we didn't see the narcotic overdoses on a daily basis that you see in every big city ER today. I tell people if I saw 6 or 10 in that entire early phase of my career, 15, 16 years, it's true. Because people that used heroin, they weren't necessarily healthy, but they knew what they were doing. It was a consistent supply that was reliable for them, and they may have had abscesses and heart lesions and things like that, but they weren't dying of overdose. It was the pill mill crisis, quite frankly, a lot of it emanating right here out of Florida. That absolutely, it was and it's been proven, and I'm not going to, I don't think libel anybody. Purdue Pharma, McKesson, all of them. They pushed OxyContin, oxycodone, because it was coded, as a non-addictive opioid. Montel back then.
which is a lie.
Of course. And I was an ER doc, so we didn't have the drug reps coming into our zone. But what we did have were the patients coming into our zone. So that later, in the second half of my career, it did become 6 a month, right? 12 a month at the end of my career. There were days that I would discharge a narcotic addict at noon, after resuscitating him at 10 in the morning, release him to family. No one could get a bed that day, of course. So you send them home with family with safety precautions. They'll find their stash at home and be back in the afternoon. Same patient. So I saw in front of me what was going on in society. And, my career as an ER physician ended because my own blood pressure issues working nights. And then I came to Florida, and listen, if we wouldn't have gotten done in Florida, and I can't wait to talk to you about what's going on in Florida right now, Montel. If we wouldn't have gotten done in Florida, what we got done back in 2016, we wouldn't have a medical program in Florida, okay? And if we did have one, it'd be a very rudimentary program with nowhere near the products that we have. Is it a perfect program in Florida? Of course not. We're going to work on it at any number of phases as the years go by. But if we wouldn't have pushed it through in that 2016 election, believe me, we'd be like the rest of the South right now, and we'd be nowhere close to where we're at today.
Well, let's go back for a second. I mean, you talked about it a little bit. You were a very prominent practicing emergency room doctor, and now you become one of the most prominent cannabis doctors in the state of Florida. It's quite a big leap. I mean, can you share what led you to make this transition to say, okay, well, you just mentioned that you were having some blood pressure problems yourself. That's what got you out of the ER. However, what made you decide to shift from ER to cannabis?
Well, listen, it was a time and place type of thing to a certain extent, and I can admit it now. I was a cannabis consumer as an adult, as many of us are, always flying under the radar, of course, having to stay away from job issues. I had drug testing in my contract every day that I ever walked into an emergency room to work, and I'd never walked into work impaired, ever. I could have been asked to give a sample any day, but I was never asked because it was always for cause, right? One of the beauties about later going into the medical cannabis space is that you meet other doctors, other lawyers, other business people, chemists, right? Brilliant people who have been doing the same thing that you've been doing, which is utilizing cannabis throughout your adult life for good, for positive. I'm not going to make a diagnosis on myself, but I think I was probably one of those ADHD kids, way back when. And instead of being put on Ritalin or Vyvanse or Adderall back then, probably sent out for an extra recess and got a spanking now and again in school. But those were those days, right? When I went to college, I actually became a better student because I actually started to utilize some cannabis and it focused me. And I think there's a lot of people like that go to a college, they experiment with any number of substances. Cannabis uniquely tends not to drag people down into the gutter. Every substance can be abused. Everybody knows that. But cannabis uniquely, and I think you know this also, Montel, as an adult who's also utilized cannabis for good, and you've had MS, of course, and there's no secret. I know I'm not hip at betraying anything. You've utilized cannabis to stay in your lane in the best way that you can through the years. And I think, that's what many adults have done through the years. And that was my personal experience. So it was not hard for me to transition from cannabis consumer as an adult to that doctor who would be out there advocating for the safe, effective with education, appropriate regulation with labeling, and legal access to a product that, quite frankly, has been misunderstood. And, it's interesting. I have a saying that on the way towards legal adult use, we actually found out that cannabis is actually fascinatingly effective medicine. But you have to respect the patient to teach them about the cannabinoids, and you have to respect the plant for all the cannabinoids that it has within it. So to me, that's why I became the advocate that I became, because I entered it initially socially because I knew it was the right thing to do. But since then, I've learned that medicinally, it's just an incredible adjunct to health and wellness in 2025.
So, doctor, I mean, you've seen, having been involved with cannabis yourself, your own self, you've seen how crazy this transition into, allowing cannabis to be used has been. I mean, I will bet. Let's go back to when, everybody really started talking about this, in 1998, 1999, 2000, California, started spreading a little bit. It was around 2002, three. I started doing a lot of public speaking about cannabis, at a time when, no one else was really out there. No one else was even willing to even talk about it. I testified before states all over the country. In those early days when we went from like 12 states to then 17, then to 25. When you look back at this, don't you? I mean, does it not shock you to think to yourself, "Come on, now we're professionals. We're people who went to college. We've got knowledge. We understand. Let's just say plant-based medicine. We understand that plant-based medicine is real. Yet we take this one plant and say, but everything's real except for that one. It's some more of this, modern era. What's real and what's not real. What's true and what's not true." How were you thinking during this period of time of transition?
It's been frustrating, but on the other hand, very invigorating watching the changes, because as I tell everybody, we're as different now from 8 years ago as we'll be different 8 years from now as we are now. And, when I started, for example, we weren't getting the referrals from the pain management world that we get now. We weren't getting patients sent over from the cancer centers, because those oncology guys know that their patients are going to get benefits from the use of cannabis. The neurologist, the gastroenterologist. So,
And
we're a part
but you,
of that
I'm
evolution.
sorry, I'm not cutting you off, but but you know this. You know that these doctors around the world are seeing benefits. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's more peer-reviewed, studied, published documents on cannabis than any other drug or any other substance on the planet right now. We're averaging 35,000, 37,000, sorry, 3,500 to 3,700 new peer-reviewed, published documents a year. There's well over 35,000, 38,000 now that have already been out there. It baffles me why the fight. Why not more? I mean, it's just the same reason why I've heard, when you look at both parties, whether it be right and left, there's real truth and there's not real truth, and there's kind of truth and there's not. I mean, that's what's going on in my brain inside the heads of doctors. I mean, they got two brain cells fighting each other.
Well, there's practical reasons for it, and then there's political reasons for it. The political reasons go all the way back, literally towards the early 1900s, where and this is pharma even back then. Opioids are water based, and they were easily, once they invented the hypodermic needle, they knew what to do with that. They could inject it, they could give it intravenously. Back in the day, you would order a needle and syringe set from Sears, And we go to the pharmacy and you would get your morphine or even your heroin back then from the pharmacy, and self-injecting was a legitimate form of medicine. But the cannabinoids were oil based, right? The cannabinoids also weren't being imported because the poppy really couldn't be cultivated here, in the States. So when you look at the importation, cannabis was being grown in everybody's backyard and every roadside. So to me, it was money. It was money back then. It continues to be money, of course. But the point is, those opioids were going to be developed by pharma, whereas the cannabinoids never so. The cannabinoids also are a multi-dimensional plant. So there's not just THC, but CBD and CBC and CBN, all the other cannabinoids. Of course, the terpenes and the flavonoids as well. So that's why for big pharma purposes, even today, it's hard for them to get what they want out of cannabis, which is a single molecule that they can research and they can study. And that's a conundrum. It was a conundrum back then, but it's so interesting, Montel. My patients come in 4 categories. The ones that have never used cannabis before in their life, before walking into my office, and we get them every day. 1/3 of our practice, actually, and it's been since day one. We call them the doobie ones, never done. Okay. They're fearful. They can't believe they're in a cannabis clinic. To them, it's pot, dope, weed, grass, the old commercial with the egg frying in the pan. Okay. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. They can't believe they're in the clinic. But they tend to be the patients that are on the 8 Percocet, the 800 gabapentin. They're coming in from the cancer center, starting any number of oncology drugs and things of that nature. So as I explained to them, cannabis was a medicine long before Percocet, right? Long before Ativan. And that reassures them that actually we're not taking away anything that modern medicine is offering to them. We're just offering another adjunct and assist, right, in their health and wellness course, right? And it's so interesting that when you start a visit like that with those patients that have always been fearful of pot, dope, weed, grass, because that's how it's been presented to them, we always start that this is medicine. And that's why really one of the motivations that I wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to get on with you, because you have such a wide voice. It's very important as we go forward in wherever we go with cannabis, right? Whatever recreational or legal adult use, whatever that looks like, we have to maintain the lane for the legitimate medical practices that are out there offering the patients that want it that educational level to how to best use this plant, right? And I know you're a believer in that, to that extent.
Well, I'm going to say, I really believe that this is what our industry has done the biggest disservice to our country with, is that we spend too much time trying to do B2B education, too many conferences, B2B conferences, too many conferences where we get people together in the industry, try to sell each other a new fucking widget. Excuse my mouth. We don't need new widgets. Cannabis has been around for 5,000 years. We need to be able to educate people on what cannabis is. We need to make sure people understand
you
that,
have to respect you have to respect the patient to educate them, and you have to respect the plant for what it's been forever.
correct.
I call it the exact opposite of the death of a salesman scenario, where you're pushing something that you don't believe in. Being a cannabis physician is so joyous because you don't have to sell anything that hasn't provided relief to some extent. You have to set the expectations appropriately with your patients because nothing's 100%. But education should be 100%, and safety with cannabis with appropriate education is 100%. We don't want weak. We don't want dizzy. We don't want anxious. That's why start low, go slow is so appropriate. But let me tell you about the other side of the coin, Montel, because I know you'll be interested in this. If 1/3 of my patients have never used cannabis before and they're the doobie ones, we have 1/3 of our patients over on this side that are doobie threes. Doobie threes are adults that have used cannabis throughout their adult life. They're the doobie threes, set me free. I want safe. I want legal. I want tested, right? I want the education too, because we have a small slice of what we call doobie fours, give them more. That's Willie Nelson, Tommy Chong, Snoop Dogg types
Michael
that have literally,
Williams.
I got it, that have literally used cannabis every day of their life for years. You know what they don't know about typically? They don't know about CBD, and they don't know about CBG and
Oh,
CBN and all those
yeah,
other. They don't. So you do a
yeah.
disservice. You do a disservice to the Doobie 3 and Doobie 4 crowd when you don't give them the education that they also deserve, because none of us are 18 anymore, right? So we all derive benefit from the knowledge of the multiple cannabinoids, not just Delta 9 THC, but all the others, and also the various delivery routes, the patches, the creams, the tinctures, the edibles, right? That's my 30-second elevator speech when I get a politician in front of me or a doctor in front of me that doesn't understand why I do what I do. You have to get off the image of the guy on the front of the zigzag papers, okay, that's just smoking the Delta 9 THC joint. That's 1969 image. And there's nothing wrong with that in certain circles and parties. But in
That's
2025,
that's that's 1760 image. That's 1780 image. That's 1790 image. That's 1800 image. That's 1809 image. 1890. That's the image. The truth is that what people don't understand, and I'm so tired, and it's so boring and crazy that to educate people in this country, you have to remind them that cannabis is really what made America as great as it is. People don't even understand this. Let's go all the way back to the late 1600s, early 1700s. You could pay your taxes if you grew hemp with hemp. And
yep.
those people growing hemp weren't just growing hemp, packing it up and shipping it off to be turned into fibers. They were sitting on their back porch and smoking a joint. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Look at the time we were living in. We were living in a time when there were no beds.
No, it's Monticello, of course, and well known in the journals of Washington
Sure.
and Jefferson. Listen, that they found residue of cannabis in the pipes at Stratford on Avon, with Shakespeare. So that's the point, and
Yeah, the
that's the
ones that
other.
sat in the Smithsonian Institute that were used for
Right. And
manufacturing.
that's the other point. It's not just the multiple cannabinoid profile, but the different ways of using cannabis these days. It is the patches and the creams and the tinctures and the edibles. And there's kind of a corollary to that. Doobie 1 never done. Doobie 2's used to use cannabis, now coming back to it. That's the middle 1/3. And then you have your adults, who have never really stopped using it. But it's such a different world these days because people travel. They go to Vegas, they go to Colorado. Their neighbor may have some gummies that the Doobie 2 will try, not the Doobie 1 yet. So there's a spectrum of past use is the point. But you have to respect everybody to their desires to safely use a substance. That's what's interesting about cannabis as medicine, Montel. It comes in through the back door because it's always been used, as you just related, through the years as a substance, both societally and as a medicine. Very unlike almost every other medicine in the conventional house of Western healthcare, that was a single substance tested out of the lab for safety and effectiveness and went through this whole DEA cycle. Cannabis predates all of that. So to try to force that peg, into the square, however, whatever the saying may be, doesn't work with cannabis. And that's why my solution to it is let pharma do what pharma do with the isolated cannabinoids and research them and find out what may be best for this or that. But don't mess with us whole plant, right, guys, while we're doing what we're doing. Just let us know and breed the plant in a certain way that we get those other cannabinoids, those other terpenes for the various conditions. I get excited, and hopefully I'll still be doing it 20 years from now. My staff laughs at me. I'll probably be ambling in with a cane and the whole bit. But I can't wait for 20 years from now, right? Once we get this Schedule 1 nonsense out of the way, okay, to see what legitimate research will show, because I'm not one to wait for research to tell me what I already know because of my 8 years of boots on the ground practice. That would be morally incapable of me being able to handle that. There's so many patients that I'm not out there helping while I'm waiting for research to catch up with me with what I see anecdotally every day. My main failure in this practice is I'm not a researcher. So to me, it's hard for me to quantify in the way that others may want to see it what I see every day with my own two eyes. But cannabis, as I said, on the way to legal adult use, what we found out was that it's an unbelievable medicinal plant if you respect the patient enough to educate them about it.
Right, and give the patient an opportunity to have access to all that information, and we should be doing that every single day. That's what our job as people who dispense it, people who work in the industry, should be about. Not about how fast can I find a new extraction device. Who cares? I mean, we're at the point of extraction. We know where we're at. We know that the research has already proven that there's probably, keep talking about the minor cannabinoids, there's probably somewhere around 250 of them. There was a day when they said there was only maybe 60 of them. Now we know that there's probably closer to 250. Then you start talking about terpenes. Then you start talking about flavonoids. And when you look at that, this is something that's going to be researched for the next 20 years before we even have a real definitive answer as to what's really going on in something that nature created that was so perfect.
Yeah, that's what's been criminal about it is actually the 53 or 4 years now since the, Schaefer Commission, 1970 or 71. Of course, and I know you know this, Montel, the Schaefer Commission that put out the entire schedule of drugs, that recommendation was to not include cannabis on the schedule of drugs, to treat it like alcohol with regulation and taxation. And I think it was Ehrlichman or Haldeman, one of the two of them, they testified in congressional committee that Nixon literally ripped up the Schaefer Commission report and said he needed that drug war, right?
Because he needed that to help. He needed the drug war to help fund the for-profit prisons. We know, and there was a whole bunch more. I mean, let's hit it right straight in the head. I mean, Nixon was driven by racism, recognizing the fact that we can easily find cannabis in the pockets of brown and black people as easily as I could find it in the pockets of white people, but it gives me an excuse to be able to dig in that pocket. Once I dig in that pocket,
of course, and still being utilized, in this day and age. That's the crazy thing about cannabis right now as a practitioner, and we could talk about where we're going in Florida, where we're going nationally. I tell each and every patient that I speak with, and I speak with about 25 or 30 a day, the only thing that I can say with certainty right now is that change will occur when it comes to cannabis. We didn't need a 56% vote here in Florida, which didn't meet the 60% constitutional amendment change, but we didn't need that to tell me what I already knew. That's why I was an advocate for Amendment 3, a vocal advocate. I was actually I call it the front side. Some other people may call it the back, but I was on the opposite side of President Trump's endorsement of Amendment 3. I was that doctor. If you're a Republican and you remember getting that mailer, okay, I was on the opposite side of that. Why was I an advocate for Amendment 3? Because I'm an ER doctor at heart for always, and I'm always going to be about public health, public safety, public education. And I know you know this, Montel, and we don't need to go deeply into it on this particular podcast, but I'll join you for another. It's the gray market, right, of the hemp space right now that has complicated a lot of the advancements, in my humble opinion, towards where we need to be in an understanding of legal adult use cannabis, regulated, tested.
I agree with you 1,000,000%. I think that's one of the things. Unfortunately, we are the ones who are doing our own selves a disservice. There's so many people who are dabbling in the cannabis space, but then out their back door, they're trying to get into the hemp space so that they can sell some product that's, using under the kitchen counter chemicals to push minor cannabinoids to act in certain ways. And we have no idea. I'm telling you, I know this for a fact. We have no idea how much damage we're doing by providing products like that and putting those in the marketplace at the same time. Because unfortunately, the regular most average people don't understand the difference between you say Delta 9. Well, Delta 9, I thought that was the product that people have been using for years. It is, but it's not the new Delta 9 that's coming out of hemp that's been pushed from CBD to turn into this Delta 9, and we don't know. I'm telling you, spectrographically, we don't know if that's the same molecule. We do not.
No, I mean, I follow every bit of it, and I give you a unique perspective as that boots on the ground Florida medical cannabis provider that sees the patients coming down from Canada, from New York, Illinois, West, California, Colorado, where people are getting legal adult use product appropriately tested, right, through the, whatever the mechanism may be in their state. Then or their country, they come to Florida, and Montel, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. They're not going to cross the border from Canada with product. You're not allowed to go state by state with product. So patients see that big THC sign out in front of the smoke shop. They are not aware, okay, of what it is that they're purchasing. What you can legislate, quite frankly, is a testing system. And my idea has always been every product sold anywhere in the state of Florida that's a cannabinoid should have a stamped safe in Florida seal and being tested by a state regulated lab.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your clinic in Florida, Compassionate Cannabis Clinic, and what sets it apart?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Montel. Once again, I think it's our tenet is education, period. And we make sure that every single patient that comes into the clinic gets what we call the 5D teaching visit. But it's so interesting because each and every patient that comes in, they want the same three things. People want to feel the best they can. They want to do it the safest, most natural, plant-based way that they can, less pharma, never more. And they want to be legal, of course, in doing so. And, here in Florida, that connotes coming in through medical. So we like to respect each and every patient by educating them in this manner. The first of the 5Ds is their debilitating condition, or what are you doing here, right? Is it pain? Is it sleep? Is it anxiety? Are you a cannabis consumer already and you're just here to make sure that you're safe and legal in what it is that you're using already? So that's always the first thing that we always determine is why the patient's here. And believe me when I tell you, it runs the gamut. There's 13 qualifying conditions here in Florida, but very importantly, it includes similar and likewise, right, to other conditions. And that opens up a whole category of patients that are cannabis consumers, quite frankly. PTSD is one of the conditions that's covered in Florida. If you're a cannabis consumer in Florida and it's illegal, you have anxiety over your use. You just do. You also have anxiety over the fact that there are rare, but it happens, fentanyl exposures in the cannabis supply. You've also read about the dangers and the unreliability of the smoke shop, right? Loophole farm bill products. So to me, if you're a cannabis consumer and or cancer patient and or chronic pain and or any number of the other conditions, then you're going to qualify. The second of the D's is that what we call the Doobie scale. And Montel, it's interesting. I've watched a lot of your Let's Be Blunts. I think one of the things that always has to be remembered about the cannabis consumer that walks into a clinic like mine, they're going to run the gamut of never having used in the past, or once again, Doobie 1 patients, all the way to those who may have already smoked 2 joints already before their 1 o'clock appointment with me that day. So you have to know your patients and you have to respect what their past cannabis use history is. So before I even see the patient, my intake people, they ask patients, quite frankly, about all of that, so that before I walk in the room, I know if they're a patient who's never used cannabis before, or one of those, once again, Doobie 4 patients, Willie Nelson types. And the interesting thing about that, Montel, and I know you know this, there is likely to be the president of the bank, the chief of the hospital staff, the best lawyer in town, famous entertainer, right? Talk show host.
Sure.
The use of cannabis throughout one's life has nothing to do with your success in your life. So it's fascinating to me that we see people from all walks of life. But the point is that Doobie scale, as we call it, or the determination, and they're all D's, determination of past cannabis use of the patient is so critical. Here's the third D that I know you're going to appreciate more than most. We call it the duality of the plant. Each and every patient in my practice gets a discussion about the endocannabinoid system. And just to re-trigger one of the things from earlier discussion, that's one of the reasons that it really hasn't gotten into the House of Medicine yet, Montel. Dr. Mishulam didn't discover the endocannabinoid system till 1992. So we always knew that THC did what it did to a certain extent from the 60s. But the actual science that's going to be taught in medical schools about the endocannabinoid system is still a new discovery.
Some of that is being taught in places like George Washington University, Harvard. Several places are finally starting to pick it up. However, it's almost like it's in that back room, classroom, way down the hallway.
It is, but
Have
it's
no
coming.
idea. Yeah.
But it's coming, and it's one of those things that excites me. I give a lecture every semester to the LECOM students, Lake Erie College of Medicine, and they have a master's program, and we're starting to see it. But each and every patient gets a discussion about the endocannabinoid system because they have to understand that in today's world of cannabis in general and cannabis as medicine, THC stands over here in its own world because it interacts with that CB1 receptor in a specific way. Key, fits in lock, turns, opens door. All the other cannabinoids work in other ways with other receptors, but not in that same intoxicating quote unquote fashion. So we try to make it simple for our patients. THC stands here, all the other cannabinoids over in this column, and then you find your balance. If you're the Willie Nelson type, you can start all the THC you want, but don't ignore the other cannabinoids that are going to help you in your health and wellness battle. On the other hand, if you're new to cannabis, you're going to start those other cannabinoids and you're going to bring your THC in from the underside. So you want to find that best balance, or once again, duality, or what we see in Florida are ratio products, right? And that's one of the big advantages of Florida over other states, Montel, just dating back to how we started. We started with oils here in Florida. You probably remember Representative Rodriguez, the original plan, only called for oral and actually suppositories in
Right.
Florida. We had to fight to get vape. But the point is, we didn't have flower early on in Florida, right? Which forced doctors like me coming into cannabis world to learn about the ratio products, to really learn about the difference between flower THC products and those ratio products, right? And there was a huge benefit to that for a doctor like me because it had to open my mind to that endocannabinoid system. I think sometimes in states that start just with flower, Ohio being one of them, which is where I'm from and my other medical license. I've never practiced medical cannabis in Ohio, but I do know that they had flower first. And I think to a certain extent, they never developed medicinally those other oil products to the extent that we have in Florida. So that duality concept. The fourth D, just to wrap it up, is the dispensary experience in Florida. Still every 210 days, card good for a year. 23 now, Montel, probably a few more operating dispensaries here in Florida. One of the fascinating things to me during the campaign was how Governor DeSantis got away with the monopoly here in Florida. Yeah, it was Truliev's money, and it was Trulieve that was driving smart and safe Florida. But where were the other MMTC CEOs standing up behind Kim Rivers saying, hey, Governor, we're all out here too, okay? And by the way, where's the next 22? Okay. And they did announce the next 22 licenses after the campaign because 3 weeks after, because that only would have confused the electorate. What do you mean 22 more? I thought there was only one, this big Canadian, company, quote unquote, Trulieve. So how they got away with that. Also, the governor getting away with the home grow, whole thing. If it doesn't include home grow, then you should be against this. And anybody that thinks the governor of the state of Florida wants home grow in the state of Florida has got another thing to, coming to him.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
right. And so the dispensary experience, would be, the last one. And then of course the last, but most important part of cannabis world, Montel, the last D, and everybody's always waiting for dosing. What never comes up in my clinic? Never dosing. We don't dose because 2 milligrams over here may be appropriate to Doobie 1, but Willie Nelson would laugh at it. So the point is, it's delivery. How are you going to use your cannabis? Are you going to inhale your cannabis for the most rapid and reliable effect? Are you going to use tinctures? Are you going to take edibles, patches, creams? I like to make the joke I have suppositories for the politicians I don't like. But the point is, suppositories are an important medicine in prostate cancer care and cannabis, or in severe intestinal Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. So it is the various routes that make cannabis the unique 2025 medicine. And once again, just going back to the image of the guy from 69, or as you say, 1619, of the smokable product, it is all the cannabinoids and all the routes. That's what makes cannabis the fascinating medicine in 2025 that it is.
And what
So
do you,
that's the teaching. That's the teaching that every single patient that has ever come in through my clinic gets. Every single one of them. And I get disappointed. And listen, we get a lot of patients from the north. They've gotten their card, many of them over the phone. And when I ask them if they've ever heard of the endocannabinoid system and they say, no, what are you talking about? I get disappointed, as I know you would be, because once again, we haven't done what we need to be doing as boots on the ground, educating each and every patient consumer from the ground up.
correct? I mean, that's that I think, and we just seem to be falling more and more and more away from it just by trying to say, well, let's just make it adult use. Let's just make it adult use, as if we don't need to educate even those who are using it for adult purposes.
What I worried about in the adult use world, Montel, and this is why I was a proponent of Amendment 3, because I wanted to be on the insides if it passed. I worried about those doobie ones in Florida, and there's a bunch of them, okay, that were going to walk into an illegal adult use world on various medications and looking for medical purposes, pain, sleep, anxiety, whatever it may be, walking into a legal adult use world without any basic education, you know, and not to death of those patients, but absolutely to some degree of an increase in emergency room visits and not getting the results that each patient deserves if they're properly educated about the plant. That's why I was so motivated to make sure that I got in front of your viewers and your world, because we got to fight to maintain that medical lane as we go forward so that doctors like myself can continue to provide that service to those that desire it and teach that next generation of doctors, right, how to do it. My goal is 10 years from now to have every doctor out there in family practice, in internal medicine, all the different specialties, having the knowledge that I have and the ability to recommend the appropriate products for their patients.
Right. And I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting is maybe right now you could say to some of our viewers out there, why do you think that cannabis is such a better choice over substances like alcohol for managing stress and anxiety and overall well-being?
Listen, I have jokes about it, and it goes back to the old ER days. Nobody knows cannabis consumer by first name basis only in your local ER. Okay, you know who you always know in your local ER by first name basis?
The
Your
heroin
chronic
movement.
alcoholic.
Yep.
And you know them by acute problems and you know them by chronic problems. Alcohol is a horrible substance. It speeds things up, it removes inhibitions. It makes people do stupid things, say stupid things, drive at the wrong time. That's acute. Chronically, of course, we know what it does to brain and heart and liver and all those things. Cannabis is the exact opposite, both acutely and chronically, to the extent that acutely you tend to overthink. If anything, I like to say you stop at the stop sign waiting for it to turn green, but no one should ever drive impaired. So I don't like to make jokes like that. But you're not going to drive 98 miles an hour the wrong way down the road because you utilize cannabis. It tends to slow you down. You overthink. And chronically, listen, I like to say to my doobie fours when they come in and they are the bank president or the chief of the hospital staff or in state government, whoever they may be, listen, they can be 75, they look 65. If you're an alcohol guy, you're 75, either dead already or you're looking 85. So one substance tends to preserve, one substance tends to destroy. It doesn't mean there are no complications from cannabis. We need safe, educated use, right? And that can be accomplished, but it needs to be accomplished with the appropriate advice. And I get frustrated with the politicians who don't invite doctors like myself up to Tallahassee to testify, to give some balance to the testimony that we see up in Tallahassee literally every year.
Absolutely. One of the groups that's completely being overlooked in this discussion a lot are seniors. And we know now all over the country when we take a look at, legal medical cannabis states, the majority of the patients that are walking in that door are normally a little bit on the older, a little older. I mean, baby boomer side. We know like in Israel, they have looked at cannabis as a geriatric drug because it helps cut back on the number of pharmaceuticals that people are using for other things. So, I mean, we should be spending more time literally addressing the needs of seniors and the senior population when it comes to the fact that cannabis might be a good alternative for them.
Listen, you just, served up a softball to me, Montel. Tomorrow, my clinic is cooperating with Cornerstone Life, one of the elder care facilities here in Venice. We're doing our senior care event tomorrow. That's where we're heading to that extent with our focus as we go forward. We know that no matter what happens in the legal adult use world, there's going to be seniors, absolutely, and patients in general that are going to continue to want that impact. When you're in an assisted living, zone, listen, I laugh with everybody about it, and I'm going to be 69 next month. When they throw me into assisted living, okay, there better be a bench and an ashtray out there in the garden if I can haul my sorry butt out there, okay, to utilize my cannabis products if I'm a medical cannabis card holder. That doesn't happen without attention and focus. We know that the sleep issues in many facilities are key. Putting a patch on patients with dementia once a day listen, there's 3 side effects to cannabis when you make jokes about it. It's too hungry, too happy, and too sleepy. So if I'm taking care of my elderly loved one, either at home or in a facility, if a patch can give a little bit better sleep, a little bit better attitude, and a little bit better appetite, those are 3, great things, but those all have to be worked on. There's federal impediments. There's federal money that facilities use if they allow cannabis in. Dr. Melanie Bone, who's a friend of mine, who's been working with Morris Life over on the West Coast and West Palm, and trying to do some research on legitimate cannabis in assisted living. So it can be done. It's a slow build, but it's a critical build. And each and every patient, be they young or old, will always deserve that level of education and safety, that I think listen, when doctors refer patients to us, the greatest honor that I get as a practitioner, my every desire, my staff knows it, is for that patient to go back to that doctor and thank them for the referral. Thank them for sending them somewhere that's giving them the education that doctor wanted them to have. And that's my next goal, is to be able to educate those doctors so that they can do it themselves in their own offices. But we're a number of years away from that. But, I'm going to stay the course and do what we do. There's too much to be done.
And I know that you try your best to stay on top of new developments when it comes to cannabis research. Anything exciting? Any new discoveries that are coming down the pike that our people should know about?
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of things, Montel, and I think we'll wait and we'll see what the research shows. But the acidic cannabinoids, of course, very interesting, and that's the non-combusted cannabinoids. And it's not just THCA, but CBDA and CBG, A. So I think the acidic cannabinoids are going to offer a lot, as we go forward with research. But research in cannabis world is so hard to do. To me, patients' well-being and how they feel, as I always tell people, when cannabis is working for you, it's kind of the exact opposite of chemotherapy. When chemotherapy is killing bad cells in your body, you're bent over a basin and you're vomiting. When cannabis is helping your conditions, you tend to feel better in general about life. In general, if you watch Seinfeld, then you're giggling a little bit more. Whatever news cycle you may watch, let's face it, we're all living in an incredibly anxiety-ridden world these days, be you young or old. And to me, whatever can assist you in navigating through that choppy water, that you're personally swimming in is going to benefit you with better sleep, better attitude towards others and yourself. Listen, my cannabis consumers in general want to be more active. They want to be out there. They want to be burning calories. They want to do the things they used to be able to do. And, once again, it's kind of an important part of the whole thing is that you have to take care of those that are debilitated. Let's put it this way. You have to take care of those that just want to come in off the legacy market so that you're able to be here for those that truly need that level of education for their debilitation. So there's kind of a fine balance, if that makes sense. That's one of the reasons why I never, took that opportunity to try to open 15 different locations. Not that there's not a business model for that, but my firm belief is that cannabis as medicine is best practiced on that one-to-one small office-based environment. And there's a balance to that. You need to recognize that people are coming in for their needs, be they significant medical debilitation or just, once again, to be a safe consumer.
Are there any misconceptions about cannabis therapy that you feel are most important and need to be addressed?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that there are those that can't use cannabis because of their level of debilitation or the other medications that they're on. my personal belief and how I've always practiced cannabis as medicine is that I'm never either or type of guy. I'm find that best balance guy. So if patients come in and they're on 8 Percocet and 800 gabapentin and other medications as well, I never tell that patient, okay, that the getting off 100% of those other medications is the goal that they should have. The first goal is to feel better and to integrate cannabis into their wellness, right, and their lifestyle. And then once that happens, then they can start to pick out the medications that they want to reduce. Montel, that's the key to it. Patients reduce their medications because they want to reduce their medications. It's their motivation that results in that. Not my motivation, not their pain management doctor's motivation. But when you educate patients about a plant that can facilitate that, their motivation takes over. And it's so joyous to see that happen. So I think that would be one misconception, is that the goal is not always to get away from or avoid pharma 100%. It's to once again utilize modern technology, modern surgical techniques, and yes, even modern pharma to feel better by finding that best balance. So, I think that's one of the misconceptions. It never needs to be either or.
I'm going to run out of time here in a second, but I got one more good, solid question for you. I mean, how do you see cannabis and the role of cannabis evolving in mainstream medicine, say, over the next 5 years?
So the next 5 years, I think, is different than the next 20 years. I think the next 5 years, I think there's certain things that have to happen. We have to clean up the hemp space, quite frankly. And I think we need to understand that the synthetic cannabinoids, be it HHC, THCO, P, hemp-derived Delta-9, Delta-8, of course, they're going to have solvents there. There's going to be there's going to be stuff left over. So to me, I'm always natural plant guy. So I think the first thing that has to happen is we have to take care of our own house. I think we need to continue to maintain the discussion of quality. We need to continue to maintain the discussion of child safety proof packaging and the appropriate outlook about what cannabis can do. I think the answer over a 10 to 20 year period of time is once again get into the house of medicine, teach our younger generation of physicians the importance of integrating cannabis into their armamentarium as we go forward. And then listen, pick off the older generation of docs, as they get to a certain point in their career where their minds are open to alternatives. Listen, doctors have financial incentive too and disincentive. A lot of them have attorneys that won't let them practice cannabis as medicine yet. Hospital staffs yet, Montel, won't let every doctor on staff that is practicing cannabis medicine. So your neurologists and your gastroenterologists and your pain management guys, they have other challenges that need to be taken care of outside of our house too.
Sure.
So for sure. And listen, the federal side of things, we may go to Schedule 3, we may not. I think you would agree the better thing to do would be to fully schedule cannabis, of course, but they won't invite people like you and I up to discuss these type of things in the Hall of Congress. I wish they would. So we're going to keep on plugging along and doing what we do at the seminal level, so to speak, and be here available to those that are interested in what we know that can assist them as they develop further policy. But my goal would be for the House of Medicine to be fully accepted of cannabis's role in that house within 15 years.
If people wanted to reach out to you and get more information about what you're doing and maybe look at your website, where would they go?
Yeah, thanks, Montel. So the website is Venice Care, Venice, Florida, VENICE, VeniceCare.com. You can find us, Compassionate Cannabis Clinic, on Facebook and, on X and all that type of too. But listen, this has been such a joy for me, Montel. And once again, just to say to you, with what you've encountered in your life and the things that you've gone through, healthcare wise and all that, I salute you for being out there as an advocate for many who didn't have that voice that you've had, and you've utilized it, and you've utilized it well. And I'm proud to have met you when I did, and I'm proud to encounter you again today. And it would be an honor to join you anytime that we can work together, on our mutual goals.
Well, I definitely I didn't even ask a third of the questions that I wanted to ask you. So we definitely got to have you back.
It'd be an honor. And listen, we're right here in Florida, of course. Listen, my clinic is literally 1 minute off of I-75 at exit 193 in Venice, the Jacaranda exit. And, it's been a big advantage to us with telehealth these days. Once I meet a patient physically, all the other visits can be done, via telehealth. So anybody that wants to connect with me and come into my clinic, it would be an honor to assist, of course. And I can be found through VeniceCare.com.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gordon, for being here. And thank you so much for what you're doing. I mean, I think you nailed it when we discussed this multiple times throughout this hour that, education is key. And what our viewers need and listeners need to understand is that the information is out there. All you got to do is Google it. There's so much information out there right now that, if you try to say, I'm going to try to figure out how I can educate myself in cannabis, you'll be reading cannabis articles for every minute of the day for the next 20 years, and you won't get through all of them. So, try your best to educate yourself. Try your best to find and connect with a doctor like Dr. Gordon. And keep tuning in to Let's Be Blunt with Montel, because I'm telling you, I think we bring you the real deal information right here. So I thank you so much, sir, for being a part. And we'll see you again, okay?
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. Take care of yourself. Love that family, viewers. And you guys, make sure you tune in to the next episode of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments. Military Makeover is so grateful for the support of Purple Heart Homes, a nonprofit organization that rebuilds and transforms the homes for our veterans.
Our heroes come home with sacrifices most of us can't imagine. As a veteran myself, I've been there and founded Purple Heart Homes to help.
When I tell the story of Purple Heart Homes, it's the freedom to not have to depend on somebody else to do the simple everyday things in life.
Visit phhusa.org/makeover to learn how you can help.